Hi folks, so now we're going to look at converting entire radicals into mixed radicals in the simplest possible form we can get. And this is the more common way to go with this stuff. This is actually what we call simplifying radicals more often than not. So let's see what we can do. We're going to talk about changing entire radicals, first of all, into mixed radicals in simplest form. And then we're going to look at some mixed radicals that aren't already in simplest form and sort of use the same process to turn those into mixed radicals that are in simplest form. Let's jump into it. Okay, so the first one, we're going to convert some entire square roots into mixed square roots. So the trick to that is we look at the factors of the radicand, like the 54 here. So I'm going to look at all the factors I know for 54. Let's see, I've got 2 times 27. I've got 3 times, let's see, 54 divided by 3 is 18. 3 times 18. And I've got 4, let's see, doesn't work. No, 4 is not a factor. 5 is not a factor. 6, let's see, what's 6 if we go in there? It's going to be 9. So we've got 6 times 9. And I think that's all the factors I can come up with for 54. Then what we kind of do is we go on a hunt through all of our factors that we see. And if we're trying to simplify a square root, go on a hunt for the biggest perfect square that you see. So if all these numbers that are here, 9 is the only perfect square I see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my radical for 54 here into the square root of 9 times 6. So I can make that the square root of 9 times the square root of 6, because that's really the same thing. And then we all know that square root of 9 is just 3. So this simplifies to 3 times the square root of 6. So the trick is find the biggest factor of that number that is a perfect square. You don't always have to go through this whole process of writing out all the factors. Often it'll sort of jump right out at you. Like for instance, look at this one, the square root of 200. When we think of factors of 200, one of the more obvious ones is maybe 2 times 100. And we should all know that 100 is a perfect square because it's 10 squared. So if you don't want to worry about all the writing out all the factors business, you're not going to get a bigger perfect square factor of 200 than 100 because it's already multiplied by this measly little 2 here. So we're going to say this is the same as, I should use that so you don't think I'm writing a decimal. So we're going to say this is the same as the square root of 100 times the square root of 2, which I believe to be 10 square root 2. And that's it. That's how we change a mixed radical an entire radical into a mixed radical in simplest form. What if we have to convert entire cube roots into mixed cube roots that are in simplest form? Well, it's the same process. I take the number that's under the root sign and I look at its factors until I get a pair of factors, or once I have them all, I look at the one that's got the biggest perfect square. Now, or biggest perfect cube, sorry, if we're looking at cube roots. In this case, I see 2 times 125 right away. 2 is not going to get any smaller, and 125 is a perfect cube, so I'm not going to bother to go any further there. I know this is square root 125, cube root 125 times cube root 2, and the cube root of 125 is 5, so I have 5 cube roots of 2. And that's as far as I need to go to simplify that one. Okay, let's look at the next one. I want to simplify cube root of negative 192. All right, so 192, boy, that's a tricky number. That's not one you work with every day. Let's look at some factors there. So for the trickier ones, let's write them out. We're going to have 2 times, let's see, 192 is going to be what, 96? Gee, that doesn't look very nice. Well, what about 3? 192 divided by 3 is going to be 64. Aha, 64 is a really big number, and it's a perfect cube. And I'm not going to get anything bigger because it's only multiplied by this measly little 3 here. So that's far enough for us to go. So I'm going to say here I've got the cube root of, and it doesn't matter which one is the negative. Let's make the 64 the negative so we can get the negative out of the radical. Either way, it would be technically correct though. So the cube root of 64 we should know is 4. So this is negative 4 times the cube root of 3 when we've got it in simplest radical form or as a mixed radical in simplest form. All right, so the other thing that we have to be able to do with this is sometimes we get a mixed radical, but it's not quite fully simplified. So how do we deal with that? Well, what we're going to do in the first one is we have to worry about that square root of 32. That's the business that we would be able to simplify there. So how would we simplify square root 32? I'm thinking 16 times 2, and 16 is a nice perfect square. So I'm just going to call this 5 times the square root of 16 times 2. So that becomes 5 times the square root of 16 times the square root of 2, or 5 times 4 times square root 2, which is 20 root 2. So if you have a mixed radical that's not completely simplified, just simplify the radical part of it, and then when you're finished, multiply your new coefficient by your old coefficient, and you'll be in business. So let's take a look at the second example. We've got -4 times the cube root of 54. Well, let's see, 54, I think that was one we dealt with before, wasn't it? Cube root 54. What did we say for 54? Oh, yes, now I remember. 54 we said was 2 times 27, right? And 27 is actually a perfect cube. That's 3 cubed. So all we've got to do here is change this into cube root 27 times cube root 2. And what we end up with is -4 times 3 times cube root 2. So that's -12 cube root 2. And then we're in simplest radical form. Wow, it's like clockwork, isn't it? Takes more practice, though, to get good at it. All right, so here are a few details of things that we talked about. To convert entire radicals to mixed radicals in simplest form, determine the largest factor of the radicand that is a power of the index. Boy, that's technical language. Say, look for the biggest factor that is a perfect square root or cube root or whatever. And then we separate the radicals, evaluate the root of the perfect power you found. So that's basically where you split them up and take the square root of the thing that's a perfect square or whatever. And to simplify radicals that are already mixed but not quite simplified, convert the radical part to a mixed form and then just multiply your coefficients. Great. See you in the next one.